at the appointment that we have given to you, 10 o'clock. But please, I think we need to have some respect for the speakers that are here on time. And so I would like to express to the people that are not here my regret. And I apologize to Aline Trabatone that has been here very punctual. And I hope that in the next days it won't happen again. Thank you very much. And Aline, you are a foreign correspondent in Italy, part of the member of the board of the foreign press in Rome. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much and welcome everyone. It's great to be here today, and I'm here to talk to you about being a foreign correspondent, what it means, what it's like, what the life is like, what the work is like, and also the difference between being an Italian journalist covering Italian news and being a foreign correspondent covering Italian news. And that applies to any country, you know, being a UK journalist in London covering British news, or being a foreign correspondent like a RAI correspondent in London covering UK news. So that's what we're going to be looking at today. Now, briefly, I wanted to see if anyone here is actually considering perhaps not so much, you know, a journalism career, but at least some experience in journalism. Would you raise your hand? There's one hand up there. Fantastic. Great. Good. Now, what I encourage everyone in terms of journalism is to absolutely get your head around journalism, news, and elements like newspeg, which we will discuss later, because journalism is relevant to every field of work. Whatever you do, if you go into the corporate world, if you go into diplomacy, and you know that's the main topic today and at this festival, if you set up your own business, if you go into the public sector, whatever you do, it's relevant. So without any further ado, let's get started. So foreign correspondents, whoops, here we go. Foreign correspondents are not very technically savvy, as you can tell. I'm only kidding. So foreign correspondents are basically journalists that are seconded to a specific nation to cover news reports and cover breaking news and news cover in that particular nation in a way that's of interest to their home country. So they obviously typically cover major political events, economic developments, any news that's of interest and relevant to their home country. So I'm going to make this talk quite interactive and ask you to participate directly. So I'm going to ask, who can tell me here what news there is today in Italy that's of relevance and of interest abroad? I mean, for example, I've been doing television lives in the past few days of an item of breaking news in Italy, and a lot of my colleagues have, from American channels, from Asian channels, from British, French, German channels, but also correspondents that write have been writing on this item of news. What's the big news at the moment? Here we go. Sorry, the beta? The beta?
International channels, but
yes, absolutely. That's definitely a big international news, but there's something that even beat that in the headlines in terms of what's being covered in Italy, from Italy, by foreign correspondents at the moment. Who can think of something? It's also been on the Italian headlines.
Probably the situation between Italy and Albania, so about the migrants.
Perfect. Absolutely, because that's been followed very actively across the board by all international channels, all international newspapers. There's a lot of interest in that from foreign countries in Europe. Some are actually looking at perhaps setting up similar schemes, it said. So there's been non-stop cover. You know, I've been in front of a camera reporting on developments. You know, first the migrants going over. A lot of my foreign correspondent colleagues went to Albania to cover the story last week. I didn't because I had other commitments in Rome, but I was here. I reported first on the migrants arriving in Albania, the 16. Then, 4 were sent back because 2 were underage and 2 had, health issues and were considered vulnerable. And then the Italian court issued a ruling, the immigration court issued a ruling saying, no, these 12 have to come back. And then last but not least, the Consiglio dei Ministri, when was it? Thursday, I'm losing track of time now. No, sorry, yes, the Consiglio dei Ministri a few days ago saying that no, in actual fact, we need to be able to, define the list of countries. So they passed a law that could technically, on a technicality, become a point of reference in overturning some of the part of the immigration court ruling. Of course, it's very based on technicalities. So as I said in many of my reports, we have to wait and see what happens in the sort of judicial process. So basically, in an essence, that gives you an example of what we do as foreign correspondents. And obviously, our role as foreign correspondents when we get parachuted in. Now, I'm Italian, so I probably am very much facilitated in this, but I've also worked in other countries. But when you basically go into another country, one of the most important things is building up your sources, getting to understand, local news, local networks, and being able to have access to key figures, and, offering firsthand analysis of what's going on in that country. And obviously beyond breaking news, and when I say breaking news, I mean, the bridge of Geneva that collapses and, in that moment that happens and you just go and cover the story as soon as possible. You also need to provide analysis, in-depth analysis, talk to experts who can explain what's going on. And I always say, a journalist is just someone who's reporting the facts. And that's something very much to always bear in mind. A journalist should not get involved in the story, should just report the facts in a very, very objective way. So much so that some news outlets, for example, I worked for Bloomberg for 10 years, some news outlets will not let you write adjectives, use adjectives in a story, because that becomes opinion. Because when I say a building is big, I may think it's big, but the person that reads the story may say, well, that's actually a very small building. So I'm giving an opinion and shaping the reader's mindset if I add adjectives. So that's something very important to bear in mind, that journalists are reporting facts. Once you start becoming an analyzer of facts, that's when you become an editorialist or an opinionist. And those are 2 very different things. Okay, next. So the role of the press in relation to diplomacy. Now, it has a very important role in terms of covering news in a given country, obviously, because it basically reports and analyzes and refines and looks at what's going on, stripping away the noise. You have to be able to get to the point and explain what's going on. I always say, in terms of Italian politics, it gets very, very complicated to report on it because it's so complex. There's so many different parties that sometimes there's the saying, you can't see the wood for the trees. That's the journalist's role in international diplomacy as well, is being able to hone in, understand what's going on when probably even a lot of people locally have difficulty. And so I find that my colleagues that are experts in international relations and in reporting, the more refined items of relevance for diplomacy are extremely, extremely able. People from The Economist, people from those sort of publications. So journalism is very relevant to diplomacy, and it does shape public opinion as well. And that's why it must be stressed that, publications like The Economist, Bloomberg, Reuters, all the sort of top tier publications and news outlets have an important role in international diplomacy and in politics and in shaping public opinion, and have a huge responsibility as well. So what I want to do today, and I'm going to keep an eye on the time as well, what I want to do today is look at the theory and the practice, and whoops, here we go. Look at the theory and the practice of international journalism, of a foreign correspondent's role. What does a foreign correspondent in Italy, and I'm not sure, there we go. What does a foreign correspondent in a foreign country like Italy do? And what I'd like to do today is open up the black box of the press, so you can take a look at behind the scenes. What does a foreign correspondent in Italy do? Let's take a look at behind the scenes. I'm not sure why this is. Okay, anyway, let's see if that stays put. So first of all, a brief introduction. My name is Alina Trabatoni. You saw that from the leaflets and from the news from the Festival of Diplomacy. I'm a foreign correspondent. My background is this. My father is a diplomat, retired many years ago. I was brought up all over the world, in China, in Finland, in Argentina, in Belgium, in England, as you can tell. And I went to university in the UK. I did the London School of Economics, a BSc in economics, and then I went to the University of Cambridge. I did a very short stint in journalism, in investment banking in London, but then wanted to move back to Italy because I had actually never lived in Italy. So I moved back to Italy and I started in journalism. I actually started at the Associated Press. Who's familiar here with the Associated Press? I imagine most people are. Perfect. It's the US ANSA. It's one of the most reputable international news agencies in the world. In my career as a journalist, I started at the Associated Press. I then worked at Reuters, at CNN, at ABC, at NBC. I did 10 years at Bloomberg doing something very, very technical, which is banks and insurance correspondent in Italy. So I used to write about banks and insurance companies. And it's basically a lot about stock market trading and looking at balance sheets. So it's extremely technical, but I very much enjoyed it because my background is that of an economist. At the same time, I also work in television. So at Bloomberg as well, because Bloomberg has a television, I was able to do both. After Bloomberg, I moved to Eurovision, and also at the same time wrote for a Standard & Poor's publication called Platts on the Italian energy sector. At Eurovision, this is television. It's a consortium of state-owned televisions in Europe, so RAI, BBC, France Télévisions, and all the other European state-owned television. We would do all the big events. So we would cover NATO events, G7s, papal trips, and also big breaking news. So Bridge of Genoa that collapses, the Bayesian yacht going down in Sicily, and the Costa Concordia flipping over, and Italian politics, and the Venice Film Festival, and all sorts of news. So I think this conveys the concept that as a journalist, you never get bored. You have a very, very wide range of things to do. So my life is very, let's say, movimentato. I do television lives on all sorts of topics. Here are a few. One is Italian politics, Draghi resignation. Another is Pope Francis at the Gemelli being operated on. You know, it's just constant, because obviously as a foreign correspondent in Italy, you have to be able to flip from Vatican to economics, to politics, to, you know, current affairs, to cinema. I mean, for example, in terms of cinema, who knows what's going on in Rome at the moment that could be of interest to a foreign publication? Perfect. The Rome Film Festival. Very good. Very good. So basically, this is my life. I write for a number of publications. I write for People magazine. You know, here are a series of stories on the Bayesian yacht that went down in Sicily with, you know, the European Bill Gates. Well, the British Bill Gates, let's say, not so much European anymore, the UK. And, you know, it ranges from Amber Heard to George Clooney and all sorts of cover. I also do something very, very technical, which is I write about Italy's energy sector, which is a very, very interesting sector at the moment, because gas and energy and anything related to power and electrification of the economy is of great interest at the moment, also due to the you know, Russian-Ukraine crisis. So before coming here on stage, I was on a laptop over there with my editor, because I had written a story on nuclear energy in Europe and the shift towards small and medium reactors. And it's going out, I think, as we speak. So you can see it on the internet afterwards. But so it shows you that, you know, as a foreign correspondent, you have to jump from one story to another, and you have to be an expert in everything. I've also covered the Vatican actively. I was part of Pope Francis's traveling press corps for many years. So just traveling around the world with him nonstop. Hugely interesting, hugely privileged job. And it gives you access to, you know, so many different countries, so many different worlds, so many different societies, communities. These are just some of the countries I traveled to: Chile, Morocco, Japan, Romania, UAE, Bangladesh, Bulgaria, Macedonia, Peru, Myanmar, just constantly around the world. Another thing I'm involved in is the Italian Golden Globes, and that's the Premio Cinematografico Globo d'Oro. Basically, who knows about the US Golden Globes? Who's familiar with the US Golden Globes? I see someone nodding there. Would you like to, well, the US Golden Globes are basically a jury made up of foreign correspondents. And here in Italy, we have the equivalent. So it's the Italian Golden Globes, and I'm involved in it, and we prize the biggest Italian directors, actors, etc., every year. So that's a brief introduction to what I do. What I really, really want to underline is that from outside, it looks incredibly glamorous, incredibly fun. And I have to tell you, I really enjoy it. You know, I never get bored, but it's a lot of work. It's a huge amount of work. I arrived last night in Rome at around midnight. I've been traveling nonstop for 2-3 days. I was up at 5 o'clock this morning, you know, preparing an article on nuclear energy in Europe, which was time sensitive and had to go out this morning. And so I do want to stress that whilst journalism looks incredibly relaxed and fun and exciting from the outside, you know, like it often is portrayed in the media, you know, it looks very organized and, you know, smart and, you know, relaxed. In actual fact, you know, journalists, their work environment is probably more like this. And you know, you're under a lot of time pressures. The more days go by, the more pressure you're under. Gone are the days that you could write one story a week. Now, sometimes you churn out 2, 3, 4 stories. My personal record was 18 stories in a day during results season at Bloomberg. And these were very delicate stories where if you got a number wrong, you would probably get the company that was traded on the stock market threatening a lawsuit. So you were under a lot of pressure. And so, you know, this is what half a year would be like for me, the number of accreditations, traveling around, et cetera, And again, you know, you go to these incredibly exciting places, glamorous places, you get to report, this is during COVID, but I've been covering the Venice Film Festival now for 15, 20 years almost. But as you can see, what you end up doing as a journalist, here was, you know, Jennifer Lopez and Ben Affleck. Everyone was super happy to see them. If you look behind them, here am I reporting to my editor, not being able to enjoy the moment, but, you know, having to be pressured, you know, be under time pressure and report on the news. And again, here is an example from CNN, some live studios at the Vatican when there was a health issue with the Pope. You know, it looks incredibly glamorous. They're there and, you know, it's all beautiful and there's St. Peter's behind. And let me tell you, these nights they were going on air every hour on the hour, and the correspondent would try and catch 45 minutes sleep between the hits. They're called live hits. So she would be curled up in a sofa trying to get some sleep between the live hits, because otherwise she would have spent, you know, 2 nights without sleeping. But when you're reporting on breaking news, that's what you have to do. You're committed to the news cycle, and you can't say, well, no, I have to go to sleep at midnight till 7 o'clock in the morning. And again, this is what it looked like behind the scenes. It's a lot of pressure, a lot of technical equipment. And I always say, you know, the technical guys involved in any event are amongst the most important. So including here. Same here, you know, you can see behind the scenes, there's a lot of setup work. There's a lot of, you know, technical equipment and expertise that needs to be on site and looked after. The journalist just, you know, is very lucky because they just go there and all they need to do is report. They don't need to think about the transmission or the satellite or anything else. So this shows you a bit of behind the scenes. And this is a typical, you know, this is called a media scrum. Very often when you go to Palazzo Chigi or you go to Parliament, or there's actually a verb that's used in journalism, which is called doorstepping. Okay, who's going to translate that for me in Italian? Doorstepping. I don't know if you can translate it. I'm trying to think now. Now, a doorstep. What's a doorstep? Hey, I'm thinking, what is the doorstep? È l'entrata della porta. The doorstep. Non so. Il ciglio della porta. Oh, is there a term in Italian? I don't think there is a term. But basically, it's the you know, marble section or brick section, or it's the actual entry. Yeah, here. L'uscio della porta. Yeah, l'uscio della porta. In journalism, in Anglo-Saxon journalism, there's a verb that has been drawn out from l'uscio della porta, which is doorstepping. Now, what does doorstepping mean? It means there's an item of big news and you need to talk to someone about it who's involved in the news. That can be Meloni, it can be, you know, it can be George Clooney, it can be anyone who's involved in the news. But, you know, you obviously don't have access to them if they're big public figures. You can't call them. Some you have mobiles for, but sometimes they just don't answer. So what do? You go and you doorstep them. You go and wait outside Chigi, or you go and you wait outside Parliament, or you go and you wait outside Clooney's house in Lake Como. And that's doorstepping. And it's actually used by Italian journalists as well now, because you obviously can't use uscio della portare or whatever. So, you know, and a lot of times you will wait 5, 6, 10 hours just to underline the fact that it looks glamorous from the outside, but it's a lot of hard work. You will wait 5, 6, 10 hours sometimes, you know, outside rain and, you know, in the cold and with other colleagues. It's fun. You know, you make lots of friends with other colleagues and get to know, you know, your colleagues quite well, and, you know, can work on the side if you bring your laptop. But it's a big commitment. And this is a media scrum, because obviously when the person comes out, then, you know, it becomes chaos. Everyone jumps on them and tries to get the best shot, the best comment, etc., etc. Same here. So, in summary, I think, you know, I think if anything, what I would like you to take away with you today, because I don't know, we can look at a few other things. But what I would really like you to take away today is the concept of, you know, the myth versus reality in terms of journalism. It's very exciting. It's very glamorous. It looks amazing from the outside, very exotic lifestyle, traveling around the world, all over, covering, meeting, you know, interesting people all the time. Absolutely. But it's a huge amount of hard work. And the other thing that's very important to bear in mind is that journalists, you know, have to report the facts. They cannot add opinions. As soon as you start adding an opinion about anything, be it politics, be it, you know, a film, that's when you become an opinionist, an editorialist. You know, with cinema, for example, a lot of publications have journalists covering the cinema industry, but within the same publication, they have film critics, because the film critic will express their opinion on the film. The journalist will not. So let's do a quick case study. What's news? What's news for an Italian audience, and what's news for foreign readership? Now, we touched on this earlier. Can someone else give me an example, you know, in the past 4 or 5 months or in coming months, of what could be of interest to a foreign audience? So to someone who's sitting at home in London in the evening watching the BBC News. And here we go. Perfect. Very good. Very good. That's of interest to everyone globally. Excellent. That's really important.
Also, yeah, no, sorry. Yeah, and
Ah,
go.
yeah.
And also the recent proposal to like make a GPA in Italian, so surrogation, and universal crime.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That was in the press. Absolutely. And you mentioned it earlier.
BRICS.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. But BRICS, in as much as Italy's relationship with them is, you know, at stake. Will it change? Is it relevant? Because I'll explain why. Because, you know, people often ask me, oh, are you covering the Trump election? And I say, no, why should I be? And they say, oh, because you're a foreign you're a foreign correspondent. And I said, but my foreign correspondent colleagues in the States are covering the Trump election, because they will be writing for Italian audiences, but I will not be writing for a UK publication from Italy on the Trump election. What I can write from Italy on the Trump election, the upcoming US election. I'm thinking back, because this is something I always used to get asked when Trump got elected, but in the upcoming US election. What I can write about is, well, if Kamala Harris gets elected, how does that change Italy's relationship with the US? Or if Trump gets elected, how does that change Italy's relationship with the US in terms of international relationship, diplomacy, et cetera, et cetera? So that I will write about from Italy. but so will every other, G7 or G20 country, because it's of relevance and of interest. But I will not be directly covering the US election. Who can tell me an item of news in Italy that's of no interest to foreign journalists, to foreign audiences, but is of interest to an Italian audience? Oh, that was not, here we go.
Maybe the Boccia San Giuliano case, that was a big deal in Italy, but I think nobody talk about it outside. So
Yes, I think because these sort of things are quite colorful. A few newspapers wrote about it, some of the foreign newspapers, but like they did with Berlusconi's, colorful private personal life. But yes, they would not go into the details because it's a very local story and it's, it's very complex. I mean, I think most Italians are like, don't have the time to understand exactly what's going on. Never mind foreigners. Anyone else have a suggestion?
Maybe the recent agreement, which is not passed yet, that they're planning to do some agreement with Albania about migration.
No, that's hugely followed from abroad. That's a big interest from abroad because a lot of European countries are either for it or against it. So the Netherlands is looking at possibly setting up a similar scheme in Albania, in Africa. The UK tried to set up a similar scheme in Rwanda. It didn't work. But the new prime minister, well, he's not that new anymore, Stolmer, has indicated that the UK is looking at the scheme to see what will happen. So it's very much followed abroad. It's actually one of those items that I think will be followed quite closely in coming weeks and months. But well done for bringing it up because it's good to discuss it and the reasons why. So I think, oh, here we have.
I just wanted to add, it's a very it's little pieces of news, and it's not of maybe any relevance to a foreigner. It's just for the comfort of a person actually living in Italy and using the public transport. All the news related to the schedules, to the closing of stations and so on.
Absolutely. But when there's a big strike, the foreign press will cover it if it involves the airports, because it blocks, that's something that people in Finland, in Sweden, in the UK, and Germany will follow closely if they're going on holiday in Italy and they want to know, will I get there or will I be stuck at Frankfurt airport for 12 hours? So yes, absolutely. Well done. Well done. Do you have? No. Oh, we're going to cut.
Yeah, just what about the bridge in Sicily? Because it is a big deal for Italians, but does it have a big relevance outside, abroad?
Oh, which one?
The bridge in Sicily, the one to build, that is about to
Oh,
build.
the bridge in Sicily. It gets covered every so often because it's such an ongoing story that it's actually a way of illustrating. I mean, the thing about Italy is we all know in Italy that Italy is extremely bureaucratic. The judicial system, you can take 15 years to get a civil proceeding in court. And that's a problem for foreign investment in Italy, because if a company comes to Italy and knows that if someone steals their intellectual property and they sue the person that stole their intellectual property, it will take them 15 years in a court case to be able to, have that person sanctioned or the other company sanctioned, then that's a big deterrent. So very often there is some reporting on how bureaucratic and slow Italy is under some aspects. And I think the bridge in Sicily, there's been talk about it for 20 years now, at least. So sometimes it does get brought up, but in a wider context, not for the bridge in itself. Absolutely not, as you point out. Well done. Well done. So we've gone through this. So I see you have a very, very good grasp of what's news in Italy and what could be news abroad. I'd like to also stress another thing. in terms of journalism. Journalists are generally very interactive with their outside environment. They're very sociable, they're outgoing. If they want to develop a very strong network of sources, and both in Italian newsrooms and in foreign newsrooms around the world, there's a saying that you're only as good as your contact book. You're only as good as your sources, because basically your sources are more important than how good you are at writing. I mean, at Bloomberg, there was always this saying, it's better to be a really good reporter than a strong writer, because anyone can sit in a newsroom and write. Reporters go out, they're aggressive, they get on the phone, they get on their WhatsApps, they doorstep, they, manage their relationships, they grow them over time with their sources and so forth. And so, a journalist's network of sources is absolutely the most important asset they have. And again, building contacts and sources, how are these built up? You have to first identify the news that's going on, and then you target the relevant sector. You can find contacts via newspapers. Other journalists have interviewed them, media handbooks. You can go to the university, find experts in that field. For example, nuclear energy that I wrote about today. I went to the chairman of Euroelectric, which is the association in Europe that combines all the grid transmission operators that carry electricity around countries. So, for example, in Italy, it's Terna. And you have to be proactive. You have to break the stereotypes. And of course, with your sources, you have to cultivate them over time, email them over time. You do interviews, off the record talks. And if a source tells you that a conversation is off the record, it's absolutely off the record. You cannot write it. You cannot cite them. Otherwise, you break that relationship. And you also develop a reputation for someone who isn't respectful of their sources, and you can actually get them into trouble. People can get fired from their jobs for talking to you and things like that. Anyway, so, sources are extremely important. It's the flip side, of course, and I speak for myself in first person, is that you do get an overload of information. You have people constantly calling you, emailing you. I mean, now at this point in time, it's been now 5 years that everyone knows that they don't call me unless it's an emergency, unless the Pope has died, or unless, there's like a big breaking news. Even my family members don't call me. We do WhatsApp primarily, because otherwise it would be out of control, the situation. And this shows you my email inbox, 190,000 emails. And it's now, I will show you, you can read what it's gone up to. It's actually gone up since I took that photo. It's gone up to over, well, just under 230,000. And the reason why I keep all these emails, I don't delete them, is that I'd be not a journalist, but an inbox email deleter by profession if I had to spend all my time deleting all these emails. But also because a lot of these people that email me, they're also press releases, but they're also good contacts. So if tomorrow a giraffe escapes the zoo in Rome and it ends up in the Trevi Fountain, and there is interest for this giraffe swimming in the Trevi Fountain, I can probably find someone in my inbox that can comment on that in some way, in some form. I can do a search on, animalista, like animal rights, zootecnico, and I probably will find some mobile in my inbox that can help me report on that story. One very last thing, and then I want to open up to questions, because I do have a lot more to tell you, but I think we're going to run out of time. But one very important thing is to bear in mind also a very clear distinction between journalism and advertising, and journalism and social media. I say journalism and advertising because some newspapers, some news outlets, actually a lot of them have advertorials. Now you have them in a lot of the international press, in a lot of the big, important mainstream international press. You also have them in the big, important Italian press. For example, Il Sole 24 Ore has it. For example, Repubblica, Messaggero have it. So it's very important to bear in mind that when it's an advertorial, so that's basically when a company or, a person or an individual pays for a news report on them, it's not independent reporting because, they have the final say. Whilst the really important thing to bear in mind about journalism is that it's independent reporting. It's not influenced, and at least it should not be influenced by anyone or by anything beyond, the facts. And if it is influenced by anyone or anything beyond the facts, then it's a problem. It's not independent. So basically, journalism in a nutshell is the activity of gathering and presenting facts and news that are relevant to the audience at that point in time. And this is very important. I want to convey the concept of what is news? Who can tell me what is news? Cos'è una notizia? What is news? How would you sum it up in a sentence? What, 1 second only, maybe we can get a, oh, 2 people together. Fantastic. Great.
Interested to know.
Hang on a sec.
I said like an undiscovered information.
Yeah.
Like something that we would interested in discovering, that we are dragged into.
Yeah, absolutely. Both those elements, but there's
A recent event that has consequences.
absolutely. You're getting very, very warm to it, but all your comments absolutely reflect what news is. Now, the big element about news is everything you said also has to be independently reported, but there also has to be a news peg to it. And that's a time element, because something can be interesting, but it can be interesting to me because I'm interested in ancient, Egyptology. But that's been around for thousands and thousands of years. So why is it news today? It's not news today. But if they've found like an undiscovered series of 40 pyramids buried under a desert, that's news because it happened today. So as you say, something recent that has a time element, something that has, an interest to the people that are reading it and that are involved. But the news peg is very, very important. And for example, if you go to a news editor and pitch them a story, and this happened to me in my early days of reporting, I'd pitch them a story, I'd pitch my editor a story, and it'd be like, no, what's the news peg? It doesn't have a news peg. So that's a very, very important thing in terms of journalism. And with time, you will, I'm sure, reach out to journalists in whatever field you go into. I imagine a lot of you will want to go into diplomacy. Is that correct? Do a lot of you want to go into diplomacy? Maybe. But when you interact with journalists, if you're proposing them news cover, you have to think, what's the news peg? Because otherwise they'll be like, they'll propose it to their editor and their editor will be like, no, we've got, Consiglio dei Ministri, we have boatloads of migrants coming over, where we have like France considering exiting the European Union, whatever. So it has to be very time sensitive. And advertising instead, and advertorials instead, is the action of calling public attention to a message that you control and craft through paid announcements. And this includes straight adverts and sponsored content and so forth. Whilst journalism, you can't control as the person being covered or as the company or as the event being covered. I always say when there's no news peg, just advertise to people that ask me for advice on how to reach out to journalists. Also, social media falls into this remit. Social media is just a platform. There is, a big growth in influencers and alternative reporting, but unless the influencer has credibility, and that can happen as well, because they become an expert in their field and they're considered independent. I mean, they're not paid by the fashion show or paid by the supercar producer to be there talking about, how amazing their product is. Then it's just social media, basically. I mean, social media really works for, platforms like Twitter and even TikTok or Instagram, as long as the outlet or the person communicating has credibility. For example, one rule with Anglo-Saxon journalism is that if you're going to cover something, you cannot have flights paid for, hotel paid for, meals or gifts by whoever you're covering, because that would undermine your independence. You would feel beholden to them in some way. So, and, the influencer world is very tied in with their being hosted and invited and gifted by the people they're covered. So that's something to always keep an eye out on. Anyway, we went through this, press cover is independent information. It's almost an eternal lifespan in today's internet age. It has a news peg, and also you're interviewing an expert in that field. But the counterparty has no advertorial control. Whilst advertising is the opposite, you have full control. I am going to suspend the talk here. We maybe next year, maybe some other time, or even on a one-on-one, please do reach out. I'm happy to. Sorry? Yeah, I'll open up to questions now. So does anybody have a question? Here we go.
Good morning. My name is Francesco Alessandrini, and speaking about overload of information, especially on social media, that I think all we youth and young people experience every day. Have you ever witnessed during your career or your job the trend of social media journalists or politicians to underestimating the capability of the audience to digest valuable and important information and focusing more on attention catchers one, let's say? And if yes, how do you think you could or we could as a society reverse it?
It's very difficult. It's very difficult because there's a lot of that out there. There's a lot of clickbait. There's a lot of different trends. There's a lot of misinformation. There's actually a lot of fake news as well. So it's a very complex universe. Personally, I can tell you that until about 4 or 5 years ago, I just did not follow social media because my inbox was enough to have to deal with. But about 4 or 5 years ago, I started to actively follow social media, and it is overwhelming. It is overwhelming. So my suggestion with social media would be to look at the solid, respected, trusted outlets. You may also have some friends that are, specifically in certain industries that may have their accounts that you can trust and that you can respect. There's publications like Corriere, Sole 24 Ore, The Economist, Bloomberg, Reuters that you can trust. And then the rest, just take it with a pinch of salt, in the sense that if there is news, great, but always try and verify it. If you see something on, an influencer site or on some site that you're not sure about on TikTok or on Instagram, then, see if it's picked up by mainstream media, because believe me, we follow it very closely because it's almost become competition for us. But it's a strange competition because you have to follow it, And then you have to verify it. Is it true? And a lot of the times what is being said is not true, or it's just part of the story. So that would be my suggestion. I absolutely agree with what you say. It's just a lot of that out there. Any other questions?
Hello. No.
Oh, here we go. Great.
I would like to ask, why do you think that, like, when we watch the news on TV or when we read the newspaper, we usually like tend to represent only bad news, and there are very, very few positive news, and probably is that because we crave unconsciously more the bad ones. But don't you think that there is an underrepresentation of what of good is happening around the world? That is my first question. Then I have a second one. And you said you are a journalist, and as a journalist, you have to be objective about what is happening. Don't you ever feel the need to express your opinion, even if you can't? Maybe you need to be objective about something, but you have a strong feeling about it. And don't you feel like, in a sense, maybe limited to express what you think? Thank you.
Sorry, I was thinking about, yeah, the first question, you're absolutely right. Unfortunately, news is bad news generally. I mean, there's are examples of when there is good news, you know, a boatload of people being saved from drowning, that's news. You know, a Nobel Prize winner, you know, for, you know, an incredible discovery, that's really good news. But I would definitely say the majority is bad news. And unfortunately, as a journalist, you're trained to look at both, but the ones that are more impactful are the bad news, because I guess in a way, it's kind of defaulted into the standard that we think everything will go well, and if it doesn't, that's news, if that makes sense. But I agree, it would be great to watch a, you know, news bulletin just with good news. And in fact, one thing that's very well known in the news industry is when there's war or when there's conflict, there's also big demand for something very light at the end of the news bulletin. So a fashion show, you know, koala bears that are, you know, wild and, you know, discovered, a different type of koala bear that has been discovered, you know, a film festival, you know, some feel good, nice, uplifting stories at the end of the news bulletin, because otherwise, you know, you watch the news bulletin and you think, well, why am I going to go out of the house tomorrow morning? It can get very depressing. I agree with that. And the second question was, remind me, yes. Well, I'm very opinionated, but I try and keep my opinions to myself, because I feel I would be doing a big disservice to whoever's reading or following or watching my news report if I start, you know, expressing opinions. What I try and do is relay the facts. I mean, sometimes the facts basically shape the opinion of the person watching the news or reading the article. Because if you have a tragedy where there's 87 people that have drowned in a boat, you know, it's you don't need to express your opinion to say, you know, this is a tragedy, these sort of things should not happen, we have to find a solution to this, etc., etc. So in a sense, you know, this is also something from the Bloomberg universe. Bloomberg, the guide when you're writing or reporting in Bloomberg is always show, don't tell. So don't tell it, show it. You know, if a company is about to go bankrupt, then, you know, show it with the numbers. You know, it's got a 800 billion euro loss. And of course, no one can, you know, carry on for years with an 800 billion euro loss on its balance sheets. You know, if someone has won an incredible, you know, prize or Nobel Prize for an amazing discovery, show what they did. So you can, in a way, you know, I mean, I think it very basically boils down to good or bad. And, you know, it's actually the facts that relay that. And but yes, I'm very, very opinionated, and my friends tell me perhaps I'm too opinionated, but I do that in person and privately with my friends. With my reporting, I just stick to the facts. Any other questions? Here we are. Are we okay for time, Giorgio? Can we spill over a few minutes? Perfect.
I had a question on what was your personal path to reach that job, your cultural background, and if you have some tips or suggestion you could give to us. Thank you.
Absolutely. Okay, so my background is I'm an economist. I studied at the London School of Economics, and then I did an MPhil, and I almost started a doctorate at Cambridge University in international relations, actually. I was an expert in modern warfare, strangely enough, in my Cambridge University years. And after that, interestingly enough, by way of my background, is I came back to Italy and I wanted to sit the Foreign Office exams here, concorso diplomatico. But at the time I was told, no, sorry, we don't recognize LSE and Cambridge. So I started doing an Italian degree, but at the same time, I sent a CV to every Italian newspaper, every Italian radio, every Italian television, every Italian news agency, everyone, and the Associated Press. Italy's very, very difficult in general, and I show this by way of illustration. From the Italian press, no one answered, ever. The AP, the Associated Press, called me the next day and said, when can you start? So I sort of fell into journalism by chance. And, you know, I enjoyed it so much from day one that I thought, you know, this is going to be my career. But it is a tough field, and it's getting tougher and tougher and tougher to get into. The way to get into it is to go to a newsroom and do an internship there and try and get as much experience as possible. You know, if you want to reach out to me, I'm happy to give you suggestions, things like that. But experience is the most important thing. Interning, every journalist that's out there, at least in the foreign press, in the mainstream, you know, in Bloomberg, Reuters, NBC, CBS, they all started as as interns. So that's the way into the industry, really. It is a changing industry. So what I would definitely suggest is to think carefully about it, because you have to be very driven. It's a calling today, much more than it was 20, 30 years ago. It was a calling, but at the same time, it was a lot of fun. You had a lot of growth prospects. Personally, with, you know, the growth of social media, I do not know what the journalism industry will be like in 20 years. Because a lot of advertising has moved to social media. And so the concept of independent journalism is being diluted, because I think a lot of the younger generation, at least, do not really understand what independent reporting is and what the difference between, you know, Twitter in general. I mean, someone the other day said to me, oh, there's this news. And I said, oh, wow, really? Where did you read that? Oh, I read it on Twitter. But Twitter is not a news outlet. Twitter is a platform. I could write on Twitter, but so could someone who's trying to, you know, distribute fake news and disseminate fake news. So it's a really, really difficult industry.
Thank you very much.
I hope that's not too discouraging, but it does mean it's a tough industry. It was 20, 30 years ago. It is now. But it does mean that those that break through into it are sort of hardcore, dedicated journalists.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the conversation. And thank you for being with us.
Thank you. It's been great to see you. Thank you.
Guys, please don't go away. Our next speaker has arrived, so.